Morning everyone, it's great to see you on a Friday and it's always nice to play on a Friday. So if you can all stand up. Okay, so the key thing here is before we play it's really important to warm up so we don't pull anything accidentally. So if you can set your feet hip width apart. That's great. And then what we'll do is just kind of slowly rotate the hips. I can see some of you have done this before, maybe last night, tonight. The other way. That's it. Now stick your arms out and just kind of rotate your wrists one way and the other. It's important to do both. Now just take your shoulders and really scrunch them up and relax them. Oh, that feels good. Do it again. Okay, excellent. Now just take the heaviest bit of you, which is your head, and just rotate your head slowly one way. That's it. It's the heaviest bit, so do be gentle. And then the other way. It doesn't matter how or which way you do it. Great. How are we feeling? We ready to play? Excellent. I have put the words on the screen for our benefit this time. So all you need to do is follow me. It's entirely up to you how much you put in because that determines how much you get out. So are you ready to play?
Yes.
Okay, one. So let's just put your hands in front of you. Ready, steady, go. Row, row, row the boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is not a dream. Row, row, row the boat gently down the stream. If you see a crocodile, don't forget to scream. Ah! Bravo! Grab a seat, grab a seat. Grab a seat. That will probably be the scariest thing you'll be doing today, and now that we have that out of the way, you can do anything, right? So why did we just sing that song? And just a quick note, when I had my 4-year-old, I realized it was a very strange song because it would be very sad. It would say, life is but a dream. And it would be such a waste, wouldn't it, if it was merely a dream? What if we were able to realize our dreams instead? And that's what we'll be focusing on today. And maybe you might bump into some crocodiles along the way and we'll figure out how to deal with that as well. So my name is Portia. I'm an executive and business agile coach. I also do personal coaching and storytelling, and I'm also a play researcher. You'll get all these slides on SlideShare after the talk, and you're welcome to use them under Creative Commons. So share them with your colleagues and friends and anyone else who cares to listen. So without a goal, it's hard to score. So here's a user story I've prepared to make clear what we're trying to achieve in this talk. So the power of hope. In order to make my dreams come true, I took the liberty to write this on our behalf. As a high hoper or low hoper you choose, I need ideas on how to become more hopeful. So success criteria. Hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to kind of raise your hand and tick off these. The first one is I can explain what hope is. I have a working knowledge of hopeful thinking. I have at least 3 ideas for increasing my hopefulness to achieve a personal goal. Results are very important. And I've had fun. Okay. Any others you'd like to add? Are we good? Yeah? Excellent. Thank you. Right. So what I'd like you to do now is turn to a neighbor, introduce yourself, and share with them one hopeful thing you have done. You have 1 minute each. Go. Okay. So who'd like to share one hopeful thing? So your name and one hopeful thing you've done.
Well, I took a photograph of the weather, so I can remember London like this all the time.
Oh, yes. It's probably the most photographed sunny weather ever. Thank you. And your name is?
Haido.
Haido. Nice to meet you, Haido. Let's have 2 more.
I hope to give an engaging talk this afternoon.
Okay.
Helpful and enjoyable.
Okay, you hope to give an engaging talk this afternoon, so we'll be able to test that. That's great. And it's Adam, thank you. Let's do 1 more.
I struggle with a hopeful thing I've done. Hope is about the future, so I haven't done it yet.
Ah, okay. Would you like to share what that thing is?
Well, I shared the similar. I'm doing a talk here today, and I hope that it impacts at least one person.
Okay, you hope.
But I don't know if it will.
Yes, and we can test that after this, hopefully, after your talk. So that's Tobias, thank you. Yeah, you hope that it will go well. So we're actually very, very optimistic creatures, human beings. So hope is very important, and it's a very ancient topic, and today hopefully we'll really explore the details of what it means to be hopeful. But first of all, I'd like to begin with a story. So back in 2008, I started speaking on the conference track. It was actually 2007. And then Agile 2008 came up. It's a global conference. It's open to submissions. So I thought, oh, I'll give that a go. And I went along to the States to do that. And that was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot. And then in Agile 2009, I discovered that they were going to have this conference in Snowbird, Utah in Agile 2011. So I had 2 years to figure out a way of getting myself to Agile 2011 so that I could be in the home of Agile. Now, I want to be clear here that I'm not an Agile fanatic in any means, but over my life, I found it really, really practical and helpful in so many ways, from just being happier at work, being a better parent, and just generally all around being a better human being. I'm very practical about these things, and I think it's really important to practice what you tell others to do. So anyway, that was pretty much a goal, or in my case, it was a wish. I had no idea how I was going to achieve it, but there were a couple of things that were crucial for me, and it was this. I didn't want to cheat to get my way there. I didn't want to, I didn't want people to pay me, or I didn't want to have to pay them to get me there. I wanted to behave in as agile a way as I could to get there. And the way I figured it out was to continue practicing at conferences and submitting. And of course, I get lots of rejections. That's okay. You kind of figure out who are the playful ones and who are not through that. And over time, I managed to get myself to Snowbird, Utah, onto the Agile 2011 program. And it's this curious thing, because what happened was, as I was wandering around the conference, and it's massive, I think they've got like 1,000 people now, if not more. It's a very, very big conference. I kind of walked around, and you can barely kind of bump into your friends because there's so many people. And I looked around and I thought, okay, it's now Wednesday. I have till Friday to get myself to Snowbird before I leave on Saturday morning. How do I do that? And I thought, well, I don't want to just go up there on my own. That kind of be pretty sad. So I thought, well, given Agile's about people, maybe I just need, 2 others, because 3's a crowd. And I started thinking about who I'd like to have there with me. And this is such a personal moment, and I've never shared it really much at conference talks. So I'm very excited about this, but I have blogged about it. So anyway, I kind of start shopping around for who'd be interested, because it is kind of a geeky thing, right? So I start asking some people, and there were speakers, and I said, would you like to come to Snowbird? And they were like, nah, we'll just stay here and drink beers. I'm like, okay. And I kind of wander around the conference and, figure out who I would invite. And gradually, I bumped into my Danish Agile friend here, Carsten Rusang. So he works for Systematic, a very famous Danish company. So I bumped into him, and I kind of said, I have this idea of going to Snowbird. I know it's really crazy. Would you like to come? And he said, of course. Why wouldn't I? And I thought, well, have you checked the program for Friday? You might have a conflict of interest. You might prefer to do the program. He goes, no, I'm coming. So I was like, that's great. And we'd booked it. But I thought, I didn't want it to be a date necessarily at this point. So I thought, we do need one other person. So I had no idea what was going to happen. But I said to Carsten, it would be great if there was just one more person. And he agreed. So then that evening, he called me and he said, oh, I found the 3rd person. And I said, who is that? And he said, oh, it's Henrik Nieberry of Scrum and XP in the Trenches. And I'd met Henrik a few years before. And in fact, it was his idea, writing the user story for the session that I've borrowed since. So it was lovely, and I thought, okay, that's it. This is exactly the trio I wanted, but I had no idea before that. So we make our way up to this place called Snowbird, Utah, and of course it's a ski resort. And I think with so much of Agile, there's a lot of mysticism around it, so it was really important for me to see where Agile was really created and born. So when we got to the hotel, I had to kind of explain to a stranger why we wanted to go into a room together, the 3 of us, to go just to see it. So before this, I needed to first figure out which room it was. So at the conference, I'd bumped into Alistair Coburn. I said, Alistair, that bit of manifesto you wrote all those years ago, which room was it at Snowbird? Because I knew he would remember. And he said, oh, it's a snow lodge. He goes, you turn left when you go in, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, great, Alistair. Do you think it's still there? He goes, oh, yeah, yeah, it's most certainly still there. So when we get to the reception, we meet this guy, and his name is Monty. And like I said, we had to explain our purpose there. So it was a bit awkward, and I thought, oh God, he's not going to let 3 adults go into a room together and just let them get on with whatever they were going to do. So I thought I'd best explain, as I always do. So I said to him, Monty, we are in town for this conference, and it's all about people working together, better IT. Not expecting, you know, anything really. And then Monty said, oh, okay, tell me more about this. And I was like, okay, he must just be like, you know, not a busy day. So he goes, and then I keep talking, and I say, well, he goes, tell me more. And I said, well, there's this thing they created. It's called the Agile Manifesto. It was created here in Snowbird. And really, we just wanted to visit the room. He goes, show me the manifesto. So at this point, we go into his office, right? And he goes, yes, where is it? So, you know, Henrik types in the URL. We're all kind of leaning in. And he reads it. He then says, I was in IT 10 years ago. But I had to leave because I was going to suffer from serious burnout, and I couldn't cope anymore because people were asking for impossible requirements. I was having to work very late, and my life and my family was suffering. And that's how I got to working at Snowbird. So when I started reflecting on how far Agile has come and the impact it has on people's lives, it's really significant. And being able to share the story of the manifesto with Monty was really just a delight and a blessing, right? So having seen the manifesto, he then says, of course I'll show you the room. And I was like, phew, that's good, not a wasted trip. So we find the room, and at this point, everything looks pretty, you know, clean and tidy and empty. So as usual, I come up with the idea and say, well, how about we write up the manifesto? So then we rack our brains and come up with the 4 values. And this is the photo of it. And I think it's just really fascinating that as I look back at my collection of photos for this trip, it was the one with Monty in it as well that really made a difference. Because at the end of the day, why do we come to work every day? And I think for most of us doing Agile, it's because we long for a change. We long to create something that's better, both for ourselves and for the people we work with. So that's what happened. We kind of scaled Mount Agile. And it, again, made me really think about where Agile has been and where it's going. And of course, I am simply one opinion, so you may not agree with me, but I hope you'll be open-minded enough to consider this. So if I were to do a finger in the air estimate of some Agile statistics, let's say 100% of people in the world are doing Agile. They say they're doing 100% Agile. Okay, so they're 100%, they say they're doing Agile. Based on what I have seen quite a lot in different domains, in different countries and different people. 90% of those people aren't really doing Agile. This is not a judgment. This is simply by looking what it is they say and what they do and how they behave. And in fact, when I really delved into it, I thought, well, you know what? I think it's about 5 to 7% are really trying. Yeah. And it's between 3 to 5% who are actually doing it. I mean, living and breathing it with integrity, not trying to manipulate or force people into doing Agile, right? Because one of the phenomena I'm seeing is that people who call themselves Agile consultants or Agile coaches, I apologize, I happen to be one of those, is that when things don't go their way, they will do JFDI and say, well, you must do this because that is the way of Agile. And I question the agility in that. And I would also challenge to those coaches and individuals who behave in that way, when was the last time they learned? When was the last time they changed and improved? And to be honest, I'm probably in the 5 to 7%, maybe, you know, I give it a good go. And I think that's really important. So let's see how we can change that, hopefully, by learning more about hope. So Martin Luther, a Reformation, I guess, a star, once said, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. And when I came across this quote, I thought, how interesting. Because as Tobias said and as Adam said, it's likely that in order to submit a session and then get selected, you are hopeful that it will be selected. You are hopeful that it will go well, right? And that's what you're being powered through. So all the content I share with you here today about hope is based on the psychology of hope by Professor Snyder, and he is a hope and forgiveness researcher. I know America has such great roles. I kind of, really admire that. And he actually wrote this book at the time for his grandchild who had literally just been born. And he wanted to share with her the gift of hope. So I'd like to start with what hope isn't. So hope isn't unrealistic or Pollyanna optimism. By Pollyanna optimism, we mean that the idea that you hope that wonderful things will happen to you, but fingers crossed, you will do nothing to make that happen. You just kind of hope blindly that it will. So that is not true hope. Then there's the idea of learned optimism. Learned optimism is when you look around you, and whenever things don't work out, you blame the external factors, when in fact the single common denominator, of course, is yourself. Then there are those who are the type A person. So the type A person runs around the shop like a bull in the china shop, probably quite a high achiever, gets results, does a lot of stuff, very frenetic, but nonetheless, they're still quite dissatisfied with life. Yeah. Now that's in contrast to someone who's a type B person. And a type B person is somebody who doesn't seek personal glory or necessarily affirmation from others, but rather they get on with what they set themselves out to achieve, and they know how to work on their kind of self-confidence and self-esteem. And hope, the good news, and very good news indeed, is that it's not a measure of intelligence or previous achievement. So that means all of us can be hopeful. And in fact, you can be hopeful from this next moment onwards. And your hope can increase at any point, and it's not based on your past levels of hopefulness. So would you like to find out how hopeful you are? Excellent. So you should have a pen in your pack, and there are these hope questionnaires. So I'd like you just to take a moment. Okay. Now, what I'd like you to do next is, first of all, add up all the numbers you wrote down and just put the total sum somewhere at the bottom. So add up your numbers. You shouldn't need a calculator for this. Okay, right. All right. So the next thing I'd like you to do, the second number you need to write down, is to add up the numbers you wrote down for all the odd numbers. By odd, I mean 1, 3, 5, and 7. So add up your answers for 1, 3, 5, and 7, the odd numbered statements. Mm-hmm. Thank you for helping each other. Okay. Oh, you guys are very quick. Right, so the next thing, and the last number you need to write down, is the ones for the even numbers. So 2, 4, 6, and 8. So you're adding up your answers for the statements that are even numbered. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Okay, so now you can set that aside for just a moment. So I'd like to talk you through a little bit of what hope is, and then we'll look at your results, okay? Nothing like a bit of suspense, eh? So hope, according to Snyder, as it turns out, is made up of 3 variables. The first one is willpower. Then there's something called waypower. We're going to drill into all this a lot more later. And then there's the goal. So according to Snyder, a goal is any objects, experiences, or outcomes that we imagine or desire in our minds. Yeah. So it could be a wish, it could be a dream, it could be a goal. Something to aim for. Then you have willpower, and many of us are still very much familiar with this term, very mainstream. And he describes it as the reservoir of determination and commitment to move us in the direction of a goal. And how many of us here actually find it a little bit tricky certain days with willpower? Yeah, I managed to walk past that chocolate croissant this morning. I was very proud of myself. So then there is waypower. And waypower is actually the mental capacity we call on to find one or more effective ways to reach our goals. And that will become clearer. So you'll be able to hopefully implement all of this practically. So let's look at your results and what it means. Now, again, the key thing is, the key thing to note, excuse me, take this, do you want to, someone maybe, you've got one? Just in case there wasn't one, cheers. So the key thing is to remember, this is simply a scale It's like a questionnaire. It doesn't define you or your life definitively, right? Okay, we're all good with that. All right. So, who here scored 32 in total? 32. You scored 32, Mohinder?
I just numbered them.
Sorry? What is that? Did you add up
Yeah.
to 32 is your total score? Okay, that's great. So you usually get one in the crowd. It's really fascinating, this, right? So that's obviously the most hopeful you can possibly be. Okay, how many of you here have scored kind of like 24? Okay. 25, yeah, okay, yeah, 24 or above. Nice, yes. And you would expect this from the Agile community, would you not, given the hard work we have to do every day? Excellent. So yes, anything that's kind of like 24 or above is considered high. So if you score 25, you're actually into the high hoping. And then, you know, average hoping is great here too. And it's entirely up to you if you want to volunteer. Did anyone score kind of 8 or below? Yeah. So that's what we consider, or what he calls low hoping. Now, I just want to be crystal clear here. Just because you might be in the low quadrant, it doesn't mean you're a no hoper, okay? Because the key thing here, we're all friends, is that hope can be increased. That's the beauty of it, right? Actually, and in fact, it's like intelligence. Intelligence can also be increased, but there you go. Okay, so let's look at this in greater detail. So if you have, how many people here actually had exactly 12 and 12 for your second and third number? Raise your hand. Okay, so you quite evenly balanced there in terms of willpower and waypower. You have a strong foundation of hope. That's great. Now, for those of you, how many people here actually scored kind of like a 12 on willpower? And then, so willpower would have been the odd number, so the first number. And then 10 for the second number. Anybody sort of like that?
Then it doesn't add up.
Then it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
You see the willpower? Yes. Yeah, the willpower are the odd numbers. So the key thing here is just look at this pattern and see how it fits you. So essentially, if you have a higher second number than your third number, that means you have higher willpower than higher waypower. So it means that you are really very determined. You're probably the kind of person that once you have a goal in your mind, you will just go at it, even if you have no idea what you're going to end up with. Yeah. However, what's interesting is that because you're low on waypower, you will be partially stuck because you're not quite sure where to go next, even though you're, frantically wanting to run towards it. Then there's the opposite. So those people who score lower in their second number, the willpower number, but those who score higher in the waypower, those are the kind of people who come up with loads of options, If you have no idea of how to get to goal, you just ask this friend and they'll go, blah, 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 and you're like, oh my God, there's like 100 of them. How did you do that? But the curious thing is these people will come up with the options, but they will lack the willpower to follow through. Yeah. And here's just kind of a sort of 13-13 split of those people who are kind of like 26-ish. They constantly keep goals clearly in their mind, and they're also thinking about how to reach those goals. Yeah. So the thing I love about this model is that it's really quite hopeful in itself, right? Hope isn't this fluffy thing all of a sudden. It's a tangible thing that you can apply to achieve more of your goals. So what does high hope look like? It's about feeling in control of your own destiny, right? It's not about denying that the world is changing around you and that there are things that you can only influence and control. It's not about that. But it's knowing about who you are, your personal values, how you orientate your life around that compass of personal values, and how you want to live your life, It makes decisions much more easy. It's about people who have high self-esteem, and by this we don't mean self-confidence. This isn't about people who will be very, show-offy or need a lot of attention from other people. Self-esteem is intrinsic, so it's about knowing your self-worth, and that requires self-work. Then there's this notion of positive affectivity, and basically it's about being present and in the flow. So when you are hopeful, you will experience flow, so being at your best creative self much more often than you would otherwise. And this is an interesting one, competitive. I recently went to an interview and I figured out the best way for me, the best outcome for me at an interview is just to be authentic. Because I don't want to end up with a job where actually the client and I don't see eye to eye in terms of values, and then we've both wasted our time and cost a lot of money. So as I was talking about this, I'd say, well, it depends on, I talk about systems thinking, I talk about playfulness and games. I talk about systems about, if it's a game I can't win or a game I can't change or influence, then typically I won't play, because I want to change the game in order to improve the world around me. And as I said all this, she said, you've mentioned winning a lot. I said, okay, yes, this notion of competition. And it's really interesting. If you talk to Olympians and true athletes, they will tell you that they don't play to win. They play to test themselves. Now, how much more fun is that? You can assure that that's certainly a lifelong challenge, right? Because if you're only ever competing with another person, that brings up a lot of negative emotions like envy and disdain and jealousy. But if you're only challenging yourself, well, it's better to nurture and be gentle and be encouraging, don't you think? And when you're high hope, you are naturally less anxious. And by anxiety here, we mean very focused unease about specific events. And likely to feel less depressed as well. And depressed is more of a pervasive sense of negativity, but without a specific focus. So let's look at how these variables fit together. We'll start with the goal. So goal is about getting from A to B, where B is your goal. So I'd like you to flip your questionnaire around, or just write on a bit of paper if you want to. Just name a goal you're currently working on. And you can list more than one if you like. This is very much for you. Okay. Now, from here onwards, as you see the red slides with the white writing, I won't be pausing for this. So as I speak, if you get certain ideas coming into your head, don't just bat them away, write them down, because they may well be very useful. Okay. So I had this goal some years ago that I would write a book. But because I was too scared to do that, and it was a novel, I was too scared to do that. I thought, I'll lower the bar of entry and write a book about Agile instead. Because I knew much more about Agile than I did about my novel at that time. What I did was I had a goal, which was to write a book about Agile. So how can you clarify your goal? Well, one of the best tools I've found is the user story. So I called it An Agile Adventure as the title of my user story. And I flipped around the template because I find it much better to think about the goal first. So in order to get more value from my hard-earned lessons learned, as an Agile coach, I need to share my Agile coaching experience. So I'm a very practical person, and I just figured out, well, I've been burned and injured so many times. I might as well share some of this, and if other people find it useful, that would be great. And success criteria or acceptance criteria. Readers feel confident enough to try out tools and techniques. Readers can apply tools and techniques right away, because if they can't, then you question the value of what you've learned. Readers have fun reading. Now this was really vital. If not, it was actually probably my first criteria. Because if it wasn't fun reading, then it's unlikely I would have had fun writing it. And if it wasn't fun writing it, then I sure as heck would not spend time doing it. So that was one of my biggest challenges. And of course, I've had fun writing. So that would be the thing that would keep me going. So that was my goal. So it's important to think about how you express your goals, and a user story is a really good format. If you struggle to write user stories, that's normal. They are really, really difficult, right? Because they are a tool for clarifying your thoughts and your goals. And I once had a team member that I was coaching, and he said, you know what user stories are like? They're like one of those Christmas games you have to play, and they're really infuriating, but really gripping and fun. But you know, it's hard to play those games when you've had too much eggnog. And he said that's kind of like what a user story was for him. And I thought, yeah, I think that's a pretty fair description. Define your success criteria so you know when you've reached your goal and how much of it. Validate the clarity of the goal. So check and share your goals with other people. And ideally, they're people who are supporting and nurturing. And what's also useful is to work backwards from the goal, because once you've identified the goal, then you can look at the steps working backwards that got you to your goal, which means that you end up doing the minimum work needed, right? And it's all high value work, hopefully. And find the shortest and quickest route in that way. So that's the goal. So then let's have a look at willpower. So how can you increase willpower? Okay, so this next bit is really interesting. Willpower is about is this kind of, they call it the driving force, be it Star Wars or otherwise, but this driving force from A to B. And for years I thought, okay, whatever, it's a driving force. Maybe some people are born with more willpower, but I mean, that's just such a limiting way of thinking about it. And when I discovered that you could develop it, that was really useful. So willpower is about anticipating change, so being prepared for change. Exercising regularly can increase your willpower. I thought, well, that's curious, but he must be right. He's a doctor, right? Maintain a healthy diet. I mean, at this point, it looks like a list from like Elle magazine or something, but I'm like, okay, fine. You know, he is also an academic. There must be something in his research. And he talks about practicing mindfulness. So that's curious, right? Because when you're present, you're making much more value of your time. And he says, laugh at yourself often, because he says, you know, it would be a shame to miss out on the fact that we are the biggest joke of all, right? By not laughing at ourselves. But I was dissatisfied with this description. So I started telling people about this talk I was thinking about and this book I'd read on hope. And I came across my friend who was an Agile coach called Anna Abukova. Some of you might know her. And she said, oh, willpower. Well, to increase that is simple. You need lysine in the way Anna does. I was like, oh, so what's lysine then? And she says it's this key amino acid that is used. You're like, great, that's just what I needed. Key amino acid for developing your muscles. It increases the absorption of calcium in your body. It helps your body heal from both surgery and other illnesses. And all in all, it's just really, really good for you. And what happens is that amino acid, that protein, does a special function in your brain, which means that you no longer lose control of some of your, I guess, neurobiological functions, right? You'll have to get some details from Anna. And I thought that was really interesting. And lysine can be found in paracetamol packets now. So look out for that, because you can buy paracetamol with lysine in it. And I think you can get lysine in certain drinks and things like this now. Fascinating stuff. You can also just get pure lysine, so I've had mine this morning, as you can imagine. So let's just talk a little bit more about what lysine is. It's found in eggs, so eggs are good for you. Meat, so red meat, lamb, pork, and poultry. Also soy. Beans and peas, and fish, so cod and sardines. And I remember in one of my lower points in my career, on Sundays I would serve lamb. And every time I did that, I'd say, this is for my family. This is a feast of hope. And then I knew that I had to go back to work on Monday. But I was going to do my darndest to be hopeful about it. And so, yeah, it's kind of a fun way to play with it. So there are some tangible things you could do with lysine. So remember, do all those great things for willpower. And of course, if you like, have a go with lysine. Moderation, though, of course, as with most things. Okay, so this third variable is probably the least familiar for people, but once I've explained it, it will probably be very intuitive for you, especially if you're quite agile. So waypower. So waypower is figuring out how to get from A to B, but when you are faced with a challenge or a blocker, how would you go about it? And that's why I have this kind of checklist as a set of options. So how can you increase your waypower? This is your third lever. So Snyder says that you can break down goals into sub-goals. Yeah, so it's like breaking big stories into little stories, and then all of a sudden you can increase clarity and therefore easier to achieve. Take baby steps, right? It's like trying to lose weight, right? If you try to lose 10 pounds in one day, nothing good surely can come of that, right? But if you're much more likely to pace yourself and understand that your body probably takes about 6 months to change its shape, it kind of makes a lot more sense. Baby steps. Mental rehearsal. So again, athletes and performers do this a lot, where they kind of just visualize what they'd like to have happen, and that kind of increases your body's memory as well. And of course, learn the skills you need, right? Continuous learning. and cultivate friendships. I mean, how lovely is that? You know, you're having coffee or tea with a friend, but actually you're increasing your waypower. I mean, how amazing is that? So, another tangible aspect we talked about was options. So I'd like to go into that a little bit more. So Chris Matz introduced the idea of real options to the Agile community. Who here has come across real options? Okay, I'll tweet some resources after this as well. So it's about a real option has a value, a cost, and an expiry condition. So it's a bit like a cinema ticket, right? The value of the cinema ticket, sorry, that's the cost, but the value of the ticket might be you are going on a date. So that's pretty high value potentially. The cost might be, well, the £8.50 for the ticket, or you might be paying for him or her as well, and maybe the travel to get there. Babysitting, thank you very much. I'm glad you're still dating as well. Okay, and the cost, exactly. So you figure out the value and the cost. And then you have this thing called the expiry condition. So it's knowing what is needed by when you have to make the decision. So if you choose to exercise that option early, you must be really concrete on why. So if you choose to commit to this date with your ticket, you need to be very clear on why you have committed, right? Or alternatively, I guess you call that person and say, well, let's just keep our options open. We might see each other on Friday, we might not. Right? That's another way of postponing making an important decision. Yeah. And never commit early unless you know why. That's really important. And it saves on a lot of regret, actually. So all those waypower tips, plus, of course, real options. So with goals, you then have willpower and waypower. And what happens is willpower actually increases your waypower. So it's really positive if you had a higher number 2, because that kind of fuels and drives you into figuring out more options. And the more options you have, that in turn increases your willpower. So all of a sudden you've got a positive feedback loop. You've got the flywheel going, you're humming, right? They're just days. Have you ever had this where days you're like, wow, things are really going as I had hoped, right? Maybe not as you had planned, but maybe as you had hoped. Pleasant surprise. It's important to know as well that actually if you don't have enough waypower over time, that will drain your willpower. And then that in turn can lead to depression. So it's really worth working on all 3 variables. And of course, when you have increased willpower and waypower, that means you can focus on achieving the goal, and therefore the more focused you are, the more likely you are to achieve it. And more importantly, as you achieve goals, you can then set yourself even more seemingly impossible goals and achieve greater things. So as Martin Luther started us off with, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. So when we look back at where Agile is, I've kind of come to this conclusion. It's you know, the conclusion will change, there'll be many. But when people talk about organizational change, you know, people still have this idea where you kind of push in this box that looks like an air conditioning unit. You plug it in and it will emit this pleasant floral scent, and then everybody will go from being whatever they were doing before, and then they'll be all agile-y and collaborative, right? Some consultants get paid handsomely for that box. So that doesn't happen in my experience. And when we look at change, the more experienced coaches and consultants I work with, we recognize that change begins at an individual level, on a one-to-one level. And if we can positively influence one person, that can have a massive, you know, impact. I guess like the butterfly effect. And of course, who is the one person we stand the best chance of improving? Right? Yeah. Oh, it's Rick. Great. Ourselves, right? But I'm not saying it's easy, right? And that's why with Agile, it's so easy to look outwards instead and demand that everybody else do continuous learning improvement. You know, how often do we end up working with people who say, well, you must change, you must do Agile. Oh, but me? No, Agile's for IT, or, you know, Agile's not for me, you guys do that, it's just for you, right? So it's really about changing and improving ourselves. So as the last exercise, I'd like you just to write down and have a think. One thing that would help you be more agile today. Okay. Now, some of you at this point will say, well, I can't think of anything. Well, that's a sign of what? Low waypower. So what do? we ask some friends. So what I'd like you to do now is find someone you haven't spoken to, share with them what your one thing is to be more agile today. And you know what? If you like their suggestion more, just write it down, you know? Okay, great. You guys have 1 minute to do that. Go. Oh, that sounds good. That's the noise of high hope, the sound of high hope. Okay, let's just quickly share. Let's just increase our options in the room. Who'd like to share their one item for being more agile today? Please. Coffee.
Limit my work in progress.
Limit your work in progress.
Have more conversations early.
Have more conversations early.
Giving feedback on the kudo cards.
Giving feedback on the kudo cards. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Find time to move in uncommon ways.
Find time to move in uncommon ways. I like that. Oh, we're going to be doing that at lunchtime. Excellent. Did you have one?
Yeah, mine was to actually kind of spend time enjoying the sessions, whereas more often than not I'm organising or I'm speaking to myself, so
lovely.
actually attend the sessions.
Yeah, okay. Great. Any more? Let's do one more.
So I want to work on building relationships.
Work on building relationships. Okay. And now you have the perfect thing for networking. You can just hold up your hope scale, talk about your goal, all of that stuff. Makes networking much more easy. Okay, so sources of inspiration, The Psychology of Hope, the book. There's a great TED talk called Daring Greatly. It's actually a book by Brené Brown, but she does a great TED talk on vulnerability, well worth a watch. Anna's talk on how Scrum boosts your productivity and willpower. And of course, there's a Real Options graphic novel called Commitment. So here's just some hopeful things I've done. So let's do the user acceptance testing. So in order to make my dreams come true as a high hoper or low hoper, I need ideas on how to become more hopeful. So the focus here isn't your starting point, is that you are going to be more hopeful. That's the key, right? Okay, so if you agree, raise your hand. I can explain what hope is. If you agree, raise your hand. Okay, so hope equals goal plus willpower and waypower. Okay, next, I have a working knowledge of hopeful thinking. So if you practice some hopeful thinking during the session, raise your hand. Okay. Next one, I have at least 3 ideas for increasing my hopefulness to achieve a personal goal. Wow, there are some real waypower people in here. Excellent. But like I said, network and ask friends for help. Some people come up with some random ideas, but write them down. Next one, have you had fun? Yeah. Yay! Thank you for playing. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.